I was so excited for this film, I couldn't believe it. It took me so much longer to get around to seeing it than it should have done. I thought it sounded fantastic. It's horrendously disappointing and exceptionally misleading. So no spoilers to start off with. If you haven't heard of it, Amy Adams plays a character who receives a manuscript from her ex-husband who she hasn't seen for about 20 years, and she begins to read this manuscript, and as she reads this, we are then taken into the story to see what she is reading. It sounds interesting enough. I thought that was quite a gripping hook, and the story that we go into is interesting. It's about a man whose wife and daughter are kidnapped in his quest to find out more about it and get vengeance, I guess. And that I thought was great, and the thing that really disappointed me is just the ending. It was just so much of a letdown. It was like building up to this fantastic thing and really kind of taking us along, making us think what's going to happen, how is this connected, what does this have to do with her life, what secrets are they keeping? There's nothing to it. Okay, so from this point onwards there will be some spoilers, so if you haven't seen it and you want to, then yeah, please don't carry on watching because I will spoil it, even though there's not really much to spoil. But I do think that Amy Adams' character kind of wasn't needed, and for me saying that, that's a horrible thing because I adore Amy Adams. She was the main attraction for this film for me. But it's kind of just like looking for a different way of telling the story within the manuscript. It was kind of like, oh, here's a manuscript story, let's plop in an additional item and make Amy Adams read the script for it to make it a little bit more unique. And that was a bit upsetting because it felt like they were trying to force two completely separate stories together, and it just didn't work. And the reason it didn't work, and this is a massive spoiler, is because there is no connection between that story and Amy Adams' character. I thought, and this is partly because Isla Fisher plays the fictitious wife, and you know, quite often Isla Fisher and Amy Adams are described as looking quite similar, so to have her cast as the fictitious wife, I thought she was representative of Amy Adams' character. And that's really not the case, because once we get to the end of this fictitious story, there's nothing to tie it back to the real life. I thought it would be like, oh, she's been keeping this secret, this is something that they experienced together and he's putting those emotions back into her. Really, I had to Wikipedia it, and I'm not the only person who thought it was odd and didn't really make any sense. And according to the internet, basically this manuscript was just supposed to be a hard-hitting thriller that would make her experience the pain that she felt once she walked away from her ex-husband. You might as well have handed her a copy of The Shining and said, here, this is dark and gritty, this is how you made me feel. I will admit that it did switch back and forth between the real world and the fictitious world quite well. I didn't feel like it jumped at the wrong times, even though, as I said, it did feel like Amy Adams' role was a bit pointless and just used as a trope to telling the fictitious story, but when it did go back and forth, I thought it chose the right moments to do that. As a character study, it does have an interesting aspect because it makes us think, if you walk away from something 20 years down the line because you didn't have faith, you never know what could happen. You don't know how your actions will affect somebody, and they could be better than you think they are, and you know, that could make you look like a bit of an idiot and you could miss out on a lot in life. But that's such a minor part to it that it just gets buried underneath everything else. I'm just so frustrated with this because I had such high hopes. I thought it was going to be fantastic, and for the most part I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think that's what's aggravating me the most. The 95% of it was amazing, and I thought this is going to conclude fantastically. We're going to find out this big twist that, you know, Amy Adams was kidnapped, even though we kind of realised quickly that that couldn't have been possible, but it was something like that where that was actually something they'd experienced, and it was this dark gritty thing about her past that was coming back to haunt her. And in the end there's just nothing to it, and the fact that it was so good for 95% of it, once we got to that final section and realised that this isn't like a true telling, it was just like, well, what was the point in all of that? Of course, credit where it's due, Amy Adams was fantastic in this, Jake Gyllenhaal was fantastic in this, for what she was in it, Isla Fisher was brilliant. Generally, the first 95% was great. We just need to rewrite the ending. I may have to take it to fan fiction and write my own ending to this film just to satisfy my need for this to be as good as I wanted it to be, or at least coming a little bit close to that. I wish I didn't get passionate about certain films and then getting let down. It's so soul destroying. If you've seen Nocturnal Animals, do let me know what you thought of it. If you loved it, great, fantastic. It just really let me down, and that's kind of made me a bit upset. Let me know your thoughts on Nocturnal Animals, and I'll speak to you all soon.